What's up guys, it's Ruben here with my review for Past Cure. The game was developed by Phantom 8 Studios with a team of only 8 people. The studio was very ambitious with the game, mentioning that they wanted to deliver a AAA-like title with an indie team and budget. The game supposedly has elements such as superhuman abilities, third-person shooting, psychological thriller, bullet time, stealth, horror, and of course, an interesting story bringing everything together. So it's time to give my verdict of the game. Does the game live up to the massive expectations of Phantom 8's ambitions, or does it fall short of the AAA mark? Let's find out. I'd like to preface this video by mentioning that this is the PS4 version of the game played on the base PS4. This review copy of the game was given to me by CJ, the PR person for Phantom 8. Thanks for the opportunity. Also, I'd like to thank Darren, a friend of mine who's part of the band Black Creek Rain, who composed the intro song for me. Their information is listed in the video description, so go show some love and support if you enjoy the song. I know it's been a couple months since I did a game review, so hopefully I'm not rusty. Let's do this. Let's start with the story. This was the biggest draw for me when I accepted the chance to try the Past Cure demo the devs sent me last month. Based on the demo and the previous trailers, the story seemed real interesting as it was trying to incorporate a lot of different elements such as horror, dreams versus reality, nightmares, etc. The story was a huge aspect that the studio was pushing when trying to promote their game. So without spoiling too much, I'll give a brief summary of the story. You play as Ian, an ex-military soldier who's had a ton of experiments performed on. Due to the experiments, Ian's lost his memories and gained supernatural powers such as astral projection and time manipulation, and now is on the hunt for the men who did this to him. Astral projection is just as it sounds. Like in the movie Insidious, Ian can manifest his spirit form to move around the environment and scout the area. Time manipulation is more like perception, where Ian moves much faster than others around him. So it's like a bullet time mechanic that you'd see from Max Payne games. Although he has some really amazing and terrifying powers, he also gets nightmares whenever he sleeps. He gets transported into these nightmarish worlds where he's stalked by these creatures that are made of porcelain. It's implied that the porcelain dolls are projections of people who are failed experiments, but the story isn't fully clear about it, so most of the time we are not really sure what these creatures are. All we know is that they're dangerous and psychotic, and that's the basis of the story. Now on paper, the summary alone I give seems like an interesting premise for a game, and it is. The problem is, the story doesn't pan out to be anything by the end of it. Not only does the story start abruptly, putting you into different scenarios and throwing characters left and right at you, but it just ends without giving any significant information our way. It just leaves you with a sense of emptiness as nothing is fully ever explained, nor do you get any answers for the hundreds of questions that you may have. The sad fact is, Phantom 8 Studios mentioned numerous times that the story is what the game is to excel at. The problem is, every story has to have a beginning, middle, and an end. In Past Cure, you get thrown into the story when it's like 75% complete, then you're abruptly introduced to the characters and it just ends without really ending because nothing really makes sense by the end of the game. You guys have no idea how frustrated I was because the game doesn't even have collectibles on the side for you to collect so you can read about the backstory. In fact, that's what annoys me the most. The game does not even attempt to give you a backstory. So by the end of the game, you know as much information as you started the game with, which is pretty much nothing. I played the game on normal difficulty and beat it within 5 hours, and mind you, I was exploring and trying to see every inch of the game. Truth be told, if you just follow the mission objectives, you can beat the game within 4 hours. Within those 4 hours, you get about 2 hours worth of story and cutscenes and monologues that Ian goes through frequently. And that's just not enough in my opinion. Even if they needed to sacrifice some gameplay, they should have done their best to add more story sections and tried to give us a full story. Unfortunately, Phantom 8 has taken the route of Ready at Dawn and followed the likes of the Order 1886 with the story. To put it bluntly, you get thrown into the mix, shoot some enemies, get some cutscenes here and there, and some mysteries are mentioned but not truly revealed, and the game just ends with full implications for a sequel. Unfortunately for me, and I'm sure many of you will agree, that the story needed to be a tad bit stronger for the game to merit a sequel. The best the story ever got was at the beginning with the cool intro to the game, but everything goes downhill from there. I stopped caring about the story halfway when it started throwing characters into the mix without explaining much. If they do get greenlit for a sequel, the story needs to be 100 times more fleshed out because as it stands now, the story is bare bones. Moving on, let's talk about the visuals. This is an area where the game shines at most of the time, but has some rough patches time to time. The first thing I wanted to get out of the way is that the game is fully played in letterbox. I was hoping that they'd give us an option to choose from like full screen to letterbox, but whatever, it's their decision. For an indie title, the game boasts impressive visual design and rendering. They sure made the cutscenes stylistic. The character models look great in cutscenes, but during gameplay, not as well. Ian looks okay, the porcelain doll's enemies all look menacing and are rigged really well, but Sophia, a character you meet later in the game, does not look right at all. Compared to the rest of the game's character models, I feel less work went into Sophia's modeling. She can look plain scary at times, and this is a problem as Ian is attracted to her and I necessarily don't feel that way. I mean, just look at her. Yeah, moving on. All the environments showcased in the game are modeled nicely, are highly detailed, and makes you want to explore. The problem is that the environments become repetitive. There was a sequence in the first hour of the game where I went from one parking lot to another killing enemies, and that's just it. It got boring because I felt that the area was used a lot longer than it should have been. Also, there's only like 3 to 4 different environments in the game. Ian's house, the nightmarish underground prison area, the parking lot, and the hotel, and that's pretty much it. I was hoping to get at least a couple more areas in the game as you get really tired of the areas 15 to 20 minutes into each area. For the most part, the game performs fine. I didn't have any major frame rate issues, but the game did crash on me twice, and every time the game autosaves, the game can slow down for a few seconds, so watch out for that. The biggest thing I wanted to talk about is the pixelation issue. As mentioned before, the visuals look great, but from time to time you can notice certain areas in the game or in cutscenes looking pixelated. It just looks plain awkward and, it ruins the immersion factor of the game. One last thing I wanted to touch on are the animations. Ian, for the most part, animates fine when you move him around, but the enemies and the other characters in the game move really awkwardly, especially the porcelain doll enemies in the nightmares. The way they move and walk around the area seems real janky and reminds you of the jank that can be found in games back on the PS2. Now, I know this sounds rude, but that's what it reminds me of. What can I do, right? Because of this jankiness, you don't necessarily get scared of these enemies. They just look weird and funny, which is completely the opposite reaction you want to be having, when you come across these terrifying foes. Overall, the visuals are the best part about the game, and with only an 8-man team, they've done a great job with it. It is, however, not perfect. Alright, time to talk about the audio design. Now, this is where the game truly takes a hit, like big time. Don't get me wrong, the soundtrack is decent and suits the game where the nightmare sequences can haunt you with the background score. The overall sound design is also decent. The problem is the voice acting and the numerous audio bugs and glitches the game has. I already mentioned how poor the story was. This is further amplified by the emotionless and stiff voice acting. Now, I appreciate the voice acting in the game because it isn't conventional where everyone sounds American. In this game, most of the characters sound European. I really do appreciate that. What I find distressing is Ian's voice acting. It just sounds devoid of any emotion at all. For a game where we are supposed to feel for the character's plight and his condition, I just couldn't because whenever Ian spoke, it sounded empty and I just didn't like it. And here's a sample of Ian's voice. Take a look.
Damn it. Am I dead? Is this hell? Or another nightmare?
Without much emotion put into the performance, the high quality cutscenes don't deliver the impact that they should, and it just becomes a waste at that point. And it's not just Ian's performance that is weak. I mean, Sophia is supposed to be an assassin, but sounds like a nice cashier lady at my grocery store. Compared to Ian, she sounds a lot more peppy and has way too much energy. The only one that was interesting to listen to was the villain, who I will not spoil, but most of the time when he spoke, the audio of the game bugged out and I couldn't hear any audio till the cutscene was over. So I'm not sure what to think about this. The audio cuts and bugs are not few and far between, it's more like at least once or twice every cutscene. This is a bit ridiculous. It completely pulls you away from the experience and made me more frustrated than anything else. Now, I played with subtitles, but the subtitles were mostly out of sync, so even reading the subtitles didn't help much during the audio cutout moments. Overall, the audio design is the weakest aspect along with the story. Even with the decent soundtrack to help you push through the game, the limp voice acting and the frequent audio cuts just make it hard to appreciate the audio design. Alright, it's time to talk about the bread and butter of the game. The gameplay, of course. What can I say? It's a competent third-person shooter that works, and it has a bunch of other ideas that is mixed in here and there. Half the time you'll be going from room to room shooting enemies or taking them out stealthily. Now the stealth is kinda bare bones. You can crouch and sneak up to thugs and perform stealth kills. The great thing about the stealth kills are that there are several different animations. It's always fun to see the different kill animations. Now that doesn't make me a psycho, I just find the kill animation satisfying to watch. Now you can do cool things like chain stealth kills from one enemy to another, or whistle to bring enemies closer. The most useful thing you can do is to use astral projection to take out a camera. An enemy that is close by will go and check out the camera, giving you an opening to get an easy stealth kill. The problem I had with the game's stealth is the cover mechanics. The game is going for the whole Last of Us approach where you can easily slip into cover and slip back out. The problem here is that the game moves you out of cover way too fast when you slightly move the left analog stick. This can put you in awkward moments where the enemies can spot you. It's really annoying. Another thing that bothers me is that when you use astral projection to take out a camera, every enemy in the room can hear you even if they're on the other side. It makes no sense. I understand if an enemy can hear the electric sparks from the camera if they're close by, but enemies inside rooms on the other side can hear it too. This seems a bit too much. Also, if you get spotted by one enemy, all enemies in the area immediately know where you are. That also seems a bit unfair towards the player, and that needs a little bit of a fixing. The shooting feels fluid and actually is fun to do. You can combine the shooting with bullet time slow motion to chain headshots and clear rooms of enemies. And this is where the problem with the balance of the game goes right into the toilet. When using slow motion, the game becomes way too easy. I mean, ridiculously easy. Even on Nightmare mode, the hardest difficulty, the enemies are just helpless. Now, to negate that, I stopped using the slow motion and the game becomes too much to handle at times. There just doesn't seem to be a perfect balance when trying to incorporate this power. Another problem with the game is the gun variety. There are only 4 different guns. 2 of them are pistols, no grenades, or any other equipment or gadgets, which is a shame. The weaponry is really lacking in the game. The shotgun is overpowered as one would come to expect, but is only present like 2 to 3 times during the game. And the submachine gun has recoil that is the size of an elephant, so the pistols are the best weapons to use most of the time. Another thing to mention is that there are only 4 different types of enemies. The porcelain doll enemies, humans with guns who can also rush you, humans with armor, and the most deadly, humans with guns that have laser sight, and that's it. You see the problem. Not enough environments, few weapons to use, and only 4 enemy types. The game suffers from a lack of variety. After you fight these enemies once or twice, you know everything about them, and the next 20 to 30 encounters become the most contrived and repetitive fights. The game does have 2 boss fights. The first one is hardly worth the mention as all you're doing is shooting the enemies that the boss brings into the battle, and all you do is pelt the boss with bullets till the fight ends. The final boss, however, is the best fight you'll get in the game as there are multiple phases to fight, and you'll need to use all your abilities to beat the boss. It basically comes full circle as you'll need to use all the things you learn in the Nightmare tutorial section. But only 2 boss fights, come on, this is not right. There should have been more. At least one featuring the porcelain dolls or something in the Nightmare would have been a nice touch. It's really a shame as I think it's a missed opportunity. The game also has a melee combat, or what seems to be a stylish and flashy quick-time interaction. You can counter using the triangle button, but what makes it awkward is that the game slows down during counters. The enemies always have priority over you when it comes to melee, so if you and an enemy engage in melee at the same time, the enemy will always win that engagement. Your mindset is for attacking, but the enemy gets to hit you and you can't really counter because you're already spamming your attack button. It's such an awkward mechanic. I wish they just removed the time slowing mechanic altogether, which would actually make the fights more fluid. Another problem is that even when you shoot the enemies, they can just run straight up and punch you. Like, come on, I'm pelting you with bullets, and you have the audacity to run up to me and slap me silly. Yeah, they need to fix and tweak that a lot. Now, that's all about combat. What about other gameplay? Well, I'm glad you asked. When you're not in combat, you can expect to do some minor puzzles that you encounter once or twice, sneak around the nightmarish porcelain doll enemies when you don't have a gun with you, and solve riddles and such. As mentioned before, you only encounter these scenarios once or twice, and for the majority of the game, you'll be gunning down enemies. Now, you'd think being in the nightmares will play the horror factor up a lot, by a lot, but most of the time it wasn't scary. The beginning was the best when it came to the horror and psychological thriller aspects, as even if the enemies catch you later in the game, it's just a game over, and they don't even kill you in a horrific way. They either punch you, karate chop you in the neck, or stomp on your face. Yeah, hardly deserves the horror mentions here. You'll get around 4 to 5 hours of gameplay with the game, and there's not much replayability as there's no collectibles or secrets to unlock, so the price point of $39.99 Canadian is a bit steep for a subpar 5-hour experience. Lastly, I want to mention that the game has few and far between checkpoints, so if you do die, you're looking at like around 5 minutes plus gameplay at times to get back to where you were. The worst one is the final boss fight that has like 4 phases with multiple cutscenes. No checkpoints the whole fight. That's all I need to say about that. And that's pretty much all the gameplay you'll get in Past Cure. Overall, the third-person shooting works and the stealth is functional and fun at times. But it feels like a lot of the aspects you'd expect from a third-person shooter with stealth is missing here, such as more guns, equipment, more stealth features, and of course variety when it comes to the enemies. The other ideas thrown in the game for gameplay are interesting but severely underused when compared to the gunplay, which you'll do a lot of. Well, that's the game, and it's time for my final verdict. Overall, the game tries to implement many different ideas, but the execution ends up failing when trying to bring everything together in a cohesive manner. With a story that had tremendous potential, but ends up being shallow and bare bones, decent third-person shooting and stealth, pleasing visuals with some hiccups here and there, very inconsistent audio design, and overall limp and stiff voice acting, it's hard for me to recommend the game at its current price point of $39.99 Canadian dollars. That's a lot of money for a game that doesn't really offer any replayability and only like 4 to 5 hours of gameplay. For that price point, it's not a story that is worth the money. If the game was around 20 bucks, I would say play it as a lot of love has gone into the development of the game. It's just the overall execution isn't there and falls several leagues below of that AAA status that Phantom 8 were shooting for. Still, you have to commend the effort from Phantom 8 to make an ambitious title like this one with only 8 people. It amazes me that only 8 people managed this actually. With a bit more time, polish, and additions to the game, it could have been great. Oh well. For me personally, the game is average. It stands at a 5 out of 10. Now I know that sounds harsh, but when I think about it, for all the good stuff the game has, there are a lot of things that bring the game down. It's not a bad game, and yet it's not a good game either. My highest recommendation is a rent, or wait for a sale, which is a bit sad for me personally as I was really expecting the story to be decent. Hopefully the devs learn from this and make a better sequel because I still want to know what is going on with the game's story. Well, that's my take on the game. Again, I'd like to thank CJ and Phantom 8 for giving me the opportunity to review their game, and I'd like to thank you guys for watching the review. If you guys found the review helpful or enjoyed it, please do like, rate, and share the video as it really helps me out. And consider subscribing as it helps the channel grow and lets you stay tuned to my future reviews, gameplay coverage, and guides. That's pretty much it for this video. And remember guys, the moral of this story is to stay away from porcelain dolls, especially in nightmares. Regardless, I'll see you guys next time, and as always, take care.